All right, yo, it's your boy Yoshikid Neo, and today we're going to be redoing the self-hosted Foundry Virtual Tabletop on a Raspberry Pi video. The reason we're redoing this video is because we're going to cut out Nginx Proxy Manager and we're going to implement Cloudflare Tunnels. Cloudflare Tunnels is amazing because it nullifies the need for anything with your public IP address. It also prevents you from having to do any type of port forwarding on a router. So if you don't have access to the router, now you don't have to worry about it. The things you're going to need for this video are a Raspberry Pi, a license key for Foundry Virtual Tabletop, a domain name, whether it's free or paid for, and you'll need a Cloudflare account. So go ahead and get all those things ready to roll, and then we'll get right into it. Once you've got your Raspberry Pi up and running and you've established an SSH connection, we are going to install Docker, Docker Compose, and Portainer. So if you head to my GitHub page, which will be linked in the description below, I have a step-by-step guide that I used for my previous two videos. Most of this information and the commands are still relevant and the same. The things that we're going to be skipping out on, though, is going to be pretty much the Nginx stuff, all of it. We're not going to use Nginx at all. And then we're going to do different things when it comes to the Cloudflare stuff because we're going to be setting up a tunnel. But the first thing we're going to need to do is go down to the Docker section, and we're going to just copy and paste these in. It's going to start downloading Docker. It's going to start Docker. All right, so after Docker is all set up, then what you're going to do is you're going to take this command. This is going to, whatever you're logged into currently. So if you just made the generic user Pi, which is what I did since this is just a tutorial, this first command is going to be fine. You're going to be able to do that. It's going to establish Docker and everything that has to do with Docker with the user Pi. If you have a different user, though, that you've created, you're going to use this command, deleting this portion and typing in whatever the username is. That's if you have multiple users on the Pi. But we don't have to do that for this. Next, we're going to get Docker Compose set up. So we're just going to run through all of these commands. These first three commands are installing Python, which will allow the scripting portion of Docker Compose to work. So without those, it won't work. And depending on which OS you're using, so if you're using, I think, the Debian, the Bullseye, the 64-bit version for the Raspbian OS, you'll notice that I went through these and it didn't do anything. It didn't upgrade anything. It didn't download or install anything because all of that is included. So these three are obsolete. But if you're still running on a 32-bit OS, I don't think it'll work. So you'll definitely want to just run through these three commands anyway, just in case. This final command is where we actually download Docker Compose. In Docker Compose, if you don't know, you're using YAML scripts essentially to create your containers. The reason I like using Docker Compose is because it's very simple to be able to back up as well as to edit the YAML file, as opposed to having a command that you run, because usually a Docker container would be like Docker and then you make the container with all the different things that you want. And with a YAML file, you're able to go back in if you want, and you can change some of the aspects. So now this Docker at startup, we definitely want to run Docker anytime the Pi turns on. That way we don't have to go in and install or start the daemon ourselves. So run this command, and anytime you reboot that Raspberry Pi, when it boots back up, Docker will be enabled and it will begin running. So that's Docker Compose, super simple. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to get Portainer. Now you don't have to have Portainer if you like doing everything in the command line and you don't like having GUI, or you just don't want extra services running on the Raspberry Pi. You can completely skip this step. But Portainer will give you a overview of everything that you really need to look at. Trying to copy this so we can get the next portion. So this is what I was talking about. So this is how Docker containers would be spun up if you don't have a YAML file. I don't think there's any real reason to have a Portainer YAML file because it doesn't really have anything that you're going to be doing differently. Once you start it up, you can download a config file or back up a config file once it's ready to go. But now that you've got that all spun up, we're going to go to Portainer just to take a look, see what it's all about. So let me open up a new thing and we'll go to that. And the port is 9000. So you get here, and this means that you've got Portainer up and running. So go ahead and just make a new user account, and then we'll then we'll go to getting Foundry. Now that we've got Docker, Docker Compose, and Portainer installed, we're going to install Foundry using a docker compose.yaml file. So if we go to the Raspberry Pi, we're going to want to make a home for this file. I recommend making a couple of different folders. A Docker folder has all of the different containers named in there for me, and then I've got the Foundry folder because that's what the name of the container is. So in here, we're going to run this command, sudo nano docker compose.yaml, and inside of this file, we're going to copy and paste all of this, and then we're going to edit it to fit our needs. So it's going to be different for pretty much everybody on a couple of spots. The host name is whatever your website is going to be. So you'll have to come back and redo this part later in the tutorial. Restart, unless stopped, means that unless you stop the container, it's not going to restart itself. I actually like to change this to always, but that way anytime the Pi reboots itself, or maybe there's a power outage, when the Pi comes back on, it'll automatically, for whatever reason, always start. So you don't ever have to worry about it. The volumes, the source is where you're going to have your data directory. So if you end up having like a network share, you're going to have some extra steps you got to do with like Samba and stuff like that on the Pi. But for now, we're just going to make this the exact same spot in our Raspberry Pi. The Foundry username and password, this is for foundryvirtualtabletop.com's, like where you actually go to buy a license key in order to actually use Foundry. So you're going to want to put in your parameters here. The admin key, this is whatever an admin's going to have to type in order to get into Foundry and change the settings and download modules, things like that. The ports, the target is what's on the outside of the port, and the published is what's on the inside of the container, my bad, not the port. So if you ever wanted to make multiple Foundry instances or multiple containers, you can do that. You keep the published the same because that's inside the container and Foundry runs on 30,000. But on the outside, the target side, you can change this port to be whatever you want it to be. So you could make up to 5 different Foundry virtual tabletops containers by changing this port each time you do it to something completely different and unique. And then you could have 5 worlds running simultaneously. Pretty neat. But I'm going to go ahead and fill this stuff out, and then I'll show you the next step. Once your YAML file is complete, it should look similar to this. The thing of note is this volumes. This is where your data is going to be stored locally on the Raspberry Pi, is in this source portion. So in my Raspberry Pi, it's going to be under the home-pi-docker-foundry. And then all the assets that I'm ever going to use for Foundry, I'm going to need to put in there later once I start making tokens and maps and things of that nature. So make sure this is exactly where you want it to be. Then you're going to do a Control X. You'll end up doing a Y when you first make the YAML file, because it's going to be a new file, and then you'll press Enter, and then you should be back here. If you do LS, you'll see your Docker Compose YAML file is there. We're going to clear out this so that we don't have anything. Next, go back to the GitHub, and we're going to take this Docker Compose up-d --force recreate command. And we might have to run this as sudo. I think I have to, because you have to restart your Raspberry Pi when you change who has permissions and stuff like that. I didn't do that. So if you end up getting an error, permission denied, just run it as sudo on the Pi. But you're going to do this command. The up-d, that's going to start up the container and detach it from the terminal so that you don't have to have this terminal up and running in order for that container to maintain. The force recreate isn't needed the first time you ever make a container. But if you ever make a mistake, or if you want to rerun the container and create it from scratch because you changed something in the YAML file, the force recreate is going to take down the old container, delete it, and create a whole new container for you. So once you run that command, you should get that it doesn't see the image that we're trying to use for Foundry. It's going to download it. All this stuff is going to go off at the same time. Once it's done, you'll get that the container is up and running, and I'll show you what happens after that. So you'll get container created, Foundry-1. It's done. If we go back to Portainer, we can look at the logs and see what's going on. I'll have to blur this out, but you'll see that it logged into Foundry. It registered the license key. It's starting to download everything. Now we've got that the server has started and is listening on port 30,000. So if we go to our 1-25, boom, here we are. So if you go to the local IP address for Foundry, which is whatever your Raspberry Pi's IP address is, mine's .25 in this case, and then you do a colon and the port number, you'll get to where you actually are going to be putting in your admin password that you created. Once you get that, boom, here we are. Look, we've got Foundry up and running on the Raspberry Pi. So we can start downloading modules. We can download a game system. We'll have to make a new world, but I think you got to make the system before you can even do that. So this is everything that we have to do on the Raspberry Pi for now. Now we're going to run over to Freenom. We're going to get our public IP address, and we're going to get ourselves a domain name. All right, so once you get to Freenom, you're going to want to make an account. You're going to sign in. Then you're going to go to services, and you're going to register a new domain. So this is where we're going to end up finding what domain name we want to use. In my case, I'm going to be looking for yoshikidneo.whatever, see what's available, and use that for this tutorial. I have noticed that Freenom, for whatever reason, when I was recording this, was having some issues. So I'm not sure if it's, my internet or their services or whatever. So just be very patient with it. Worst case scenario, you could always go and buy yourself a domain name from like Cloudflare or GoDaddy, I think is another one. I use Cloudflare for my actual domain name that I'm using. So, but this is the free option. So we're going to try and wait until it actually resolves and gives us something. All right, so after going through that hassle, I was able to get a yoshikidyoutube.tk domain address. I actually did this in my last video, so I'm just gonna end up using it again. But in order to see whatever domain names you've got, you can always go to services and go to my domains, and this is where they're kept. Now the thing is, we're gonna end up having to come and manage this domain, and we're going to have to change the name servers when we get over to Cloudflare and set it up as a new website. All right, so once you've gotten a Cloudflare account and you're all signed in, you'll need to go under the websites tab, and we're going to add a new site. When we go to add a new site, we're going to be presented with this screen, which is going to ask us what is our site. And we're going to end up yoshikidyoutube.tk. We're going to add that site. Going to think. We're going to have to figure out if you want to pay for any of these, go for it. Otherwise, we're just going to do the free version. That's what I use in my actual setup. I don't see any reason to actually pay for a service, so this should be fine. It's going to look and make sure there's no DNS records. This part right here, this is the fun part we're going to get into. We'll end up adding a record later. The record is what, actually we're not even going to add our own record. We're going to do that all through tunneling. So we don't even need this part. We did in the old way of doing everything, but we don't need it anymore. So now what we're going to do, because this is a Freenom address, it's going to be using these name servers. What we want to do is we want to use these ones that Cloudflare gives us. So once you get those, you're going to go back to Freenom. You're going to go to the services, my domains. You're going to manage the domain, and we're going to go to this manage Freenom DNS. Or no, we're going to go to the management tools name servers. The default name servers are those Freenom ones. We don't want to use those. We want to use whatever Cloudflare's given us, and it's probably going to give you something different. So put those in, change name servers, and it sometimes takes a couple of hours to about a day, maybe two, for these to actually propagate properly. So that may be the case for you. Maybe you'll get lucky and nothing else happens. But once you get these name servers, then you change them, and then we can do this, and it probably isn't going to be able to find it right away. Like I said, we can look at some of the other configuration. You know what, we'll do all this stuff later. For now, we've got the overview. These are the name servers we're using, and we should be able to go on to the tunneling. One thing you might want to do once you do get your site all up and running is you might want to go to this SSL TLS tab and change it to full or full strict. That's just going to give you some extra layers of security. I did check on flexible, and my hosted websites still work with the tunnel, but I'm not 100% sure if it's because of the tunnel or if it's because of these settings. So I would just keep it as full, because it's going to end up giving a self-signed certificate and stuff like that, and might as well have the extra safety. Once you've updated the name servers on Freenom with the ones you were given on Cloudflare, when you go back to your overview page, you're actually going to see pending name server update. And when you go and look at it, you can make sure that you did get the right name servers, just in case if you're worried about it. They should be right here. But it does say it takes up to 24 hours to process, so you just have to be patient. I believe if you do buy a domain from Cloudflare, it's like almost instant because it's the same service, so feel free to do that. I'm actually going to be using my yoshikidneo5.tk address to get the rest of this rolling. Now that your name servers have propagated, you'll be able to go into the website and you'll have the dashboard full of a bunch of random info and things like that. What we're interested in is going to this Access tab and launching the Zero Trust portion. Once we get to the Zero Trust portion, we're going to go to Tunnels. We're going to go to the Access tab, we're going to go through Tunnels, and we're going to create a new tunnel. When you create the tunnel, you're going to have to give it a name. Then you're going to have to install the connector. So the connector, it can be on any of these services. I did try Docker, it didn't work, and I think it's because the Raspberry Pi and the Docker image, they don't line up. So for these purposes, just use Debian if you're using Raspbian, ARM64 or 32-bit, whichever you're using. And all you literally have to do is copy this portion right here, and then we're going to go to our Pi, we're going to paste it, we're going to press enter, and it's going to go through and it's going to download the deb file, and then it's going to start up the Cloudflare system daemon. And once that's done, it's going to use that service install, which is the little tunnel key. And if we do an ls, you can see right here, that's the deb file that it downloaded and unpacked to make our tunnel. So the tunnel is up and running now. If we go to next, here is where we can make our public host names. So the subdomain that I'm going to end up using, I'll use Foundry. And then we're going to want to use yoshikidneo.5. Oh, I'm not showing this one. We're going to use Foundry as and you can make the subdomain whatever you want. I'm using Foundry. The domain name, you'll actually get a drop down of all your websites. We're going to point mine to Yoshikidneo. And then the service right here, I don't think it matters. I think HTTP, and then it'll upgrade it to HTTPS. And then we're going to use our Raspberry Pi's local address, as well as the port that we've got it running. We don't need any of these other settings. We're going to do that, and now we see that the Foundry test is active. If we go into configure and go to the public host names, we should have an active link, and when we click it, voila, we're on Foundry www.yoshikidneo5.tk. HTTPS, if we take a look, the connection is secure. Well, I guess I can't show you my certificate, which isn't fine, or which is fine, but you'll end up having your certificate signed from Cloudflare itself. And there you go. Now you're up and running on a brand new Foundry installation. It's just that simple. So once we get logged in here, like, we can go and do all types of stuff. The fun thing about using the access tunnels is we can actually add different stipulations to this whole thing. So if we go to applications, you can create an application for Foundry, and you can actually make access lists on who's allowed to come in. Because right now, as it stands, when you first set this up, anyone and everyone can come through. The way I've got it set up is I've gotten all of my players' email addresses and I've added them to an access list. Anytime my players connect to my Foundry server through the domain name, they're going to be given a screen telling them, hey, in order to log into this, we need your email address. And as long as their email address is on that access list, it'll send them a code to their email. They input that code and then they're allowed on Foundry. And if you don't have your email on that list, you never get a code. This will add extra layers of security. However secure you want your Foundry server to be, that's what you would end up doing is under this applications and these access groups, you go through that. But just for the bare basics, this is what we were trying to accomplish. And now we've got it up and running. So the cool thing is anytime your Raspberry Pi restarts, this tunnel is automatically, just like Docker, it's automatically going to start and post to the web. And you'll be able to utilize Foundry from wherever you're at. So yeah. And there you have it. That is Foundry Virtual Tabletop, self-hosted on a Raspberry Pi using Cloudflare Tunnels to publish our domain name out onto the internet. So there's a lot more that you could go into to add extra layers of security, like I said. So play around with the applications tab and the access groups and things like that to get to the level of security that you're comfortable with. Otherwise, you have a brand new working server working through your domain name. You can disseminate that to your players and you can start playing Foundry while hosting it on a Raspberry Pi. If you do have any questions, check out my Discord. There is a tech help channel in there where I have people come in and they ask questions. And if I have the time, I actually try to work through the issue with you. But the cool thing about using the tunnel is as long as that tunnel service is up and running on your Raspberry Pi, if your public IP changes, which most of you that are on, residential ISPs, it's going to change all the time. You've got a dynamic IP typically. So now you don't have to ever worry about getting a 522 error when you go to your website because the IP address has changed. You don't have to worry about any of your A records. Cloudflare will take care of all of that for you, which is a less of a headache for the end user. So hopefully you've enjoyed this. Please, if you do have any questions, either leave a comment, go to my Discord or that tech help channel, or send me a message on Discord itself. I hope this has been helpful and enjoy your new server.